I spent 41 years building a marriage with a woman I loved more than my own life. And I spent 11 days in a hospital bed recovering from a triple bypass. And I came home to find my daughter had already cleared out my wife's side of the closet for another man's clothes. "Dad, don't make this weird," Danielle said, not even looking up from folding one of his shirts. "Trevor needed somewhere to stay, and you weren't using the room anyway." I stood in that doorway and felt my legs go soft underneath me. What none of them knew was that Eleanor had already seen this coming, long before she died, and she had left me everything I needed to prove it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we get into this one, drop the name of your city down in the comments. And if you're new here, go ahead and hit subscribe, because this story earns every single twist in it. And as always, a quick reminder that this story blends dramatized elements for entertainment purposes, though the message underneath it is very real. My name is Raymond Whitfield. I'm 71 years old. And if I hadn't been discharged 3 days early from that rehabilitation facility, I would have lost my house, my savings, and the last physical pieces of my wife I had left, all without ever knowing who had taken them from me. Let's begin. Eleanor and I were married for 41 years before the cancer took her, 14 months before any of it happened. It was ovarian caught late, and the 11 months between diagnosis and the morning she went were the longest and shortest of my life all at once. She went in October on a Tuesday with the leaves already turned that deep rust color along Larchmont Avenue, and I still keep her side of the bed made the way she liked it, tucked tight at the corners, because she used to say a sloppy bed was the first sign a house was falling apart. I retired from United States Postal Service after 34 years as a supervisor out of the Dayton Distribution Center on Southern Boulevard. And after Eleanor passed, my days shrank down to small, careful routines, the kind a man builds not because they bring him joy, but because they keep the hours from collapsing in on him. Coffee at 6, black, no sugar, because Eleanor was the one who liked cream, and I never got used to buying it just for myself. The newspaper on the porch by 7, even in the cold, because the porch light still smelled faintly of the citronella candles she used to burn out there in the summer. A drive out to Woodland Cemetery on Sundays with a fresh bunch of daisies, because roses made her sneeze, a fact I still honored 11 months after she could no longer sneeze at anything. My daughter Danielle, 42, lived 20 minutes away in Kettering with a job at an insurance office she'd held for 6 years, and our relationship had gone quiet in a way I couldn't quite name, something that had started even before Eleanor got sick and had only grown wider since. A distance made of missed Sunday calls and short, clipped visits that never lasted past the length of a cup of coffee. I told myself it was grief working on both of us differently, that she was mourning her mother in her own way, and I needed to give her room for it. I didn't yet know it was something else entirely. On February 3rd, I had a triple bypass at Miami Valley Hospital after 2 years of chest pain I'd been stubbornly ignoring. The surgery went fine, the surgeon told me, all things considered, but my recovery meant 21 days at Maple Grove Rehabilitation and Nursing on the east side of town, relearning how to walk stairs and take a full breath without wincing. Danielle visited twice in those 21 days. The first time she brought flowers and stayed 40 minutes. The second time she brought a man named Trevor Hale, introduced as her boyfriend of 4 months. A broad-shouldered 50-year-old with a salesman's smile who called himself a financial consultant and shook my hand a beat too long, like he was sizing up the grip of a man he already considered weak. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was more concerned with the tightness in my chest than the tightness in his handshake. My discharge was supposed to be March 5th. On March 2nd, my physical therapist, a patient young woman named Priya, who'd walked me the full length of the rehabilitation wing 4 times that morning without me needing to stop and catch my breath, told me my numbers were strong enough to send me home 3 days ahead of schedule, and I was thrilled, genuinely thrilled, thinking only of sleeping in my own bed again and eating something that hadn't come off a hospital cart. Jerry Voss, my old friend and former mail route partner of 22 years, picked me up that afternoon in his Buick, the heater rattling the way it always did, a country station playing low on the radio, while he asked me twice if I was sure I felt strong enough to skip the extra 3 days. We turned onto Larchmont Avenue a little after 4 in the afternoon, the March sky the color of wet concrete, bare maple branches dripping from an earlier sleet, and the first thing I noticed was a Ford F-150 parked in my driveway where my own Buick Blue Camry should have been sitting. Jerry noticed it too, and I saw his jaw tighten before either of us said a word. The second thing I noticed, walking through my own front door with my cane in one hand and a duffel bag of hospital pajamas in the other, was the smell of a cologne that wasn't mine, thick and sweet, hanging in the hallway like it had already moved in and gotten comfortable, mixed underneath with a faint chemical smell of fresh carpet cleaner, as if someone had been scrubbing the house clean of anything that still smelled like Eleanor. I found them in the bedroom Eleanor and I had shared for 36 years. Danielle was folding Trevor's shirts into my dresser, the one that used to hold Eleanor's cardigans and half of her things, the cardigans, her reading glasses case, the little cedar box where she kept her mother's brooch, were already gone, stacked in cardboard boxes, shoved into the hall closet like inventory nobody wanted anymore. "Dad," Danielle said, not even startled, like she'd expected me to walk in on this exact scene eventually and had already decided how she'd play it. "Don't make this weird. Trevor needed somewhere to stay, and you weren't using the room anyway." Trevor didn't even stand up from the bed. He just said, "Easy as anything. Relax, old man. We already talked to a lawyer about getting your affairs in order while you were laid up. Made sense to consolidate." I asked her, my voice shaking in a way I hated, how long this had been going on. And she said 3 weeks, like 3 weeks was a small number. Like 3 weeks wasn't the exact length of time I'd been lying in a rehab bed learning to breathe again. The confrontation that followed is the part of this story I still turn over in my mind more than any other. I asked Danielle point blank whether she and Trevor had discussed selling the house, and she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her since she was 19, and I'd caught her lying about a car she'd wrecked. "You would have wanted this eventually, Dad," she said. "Mom's been gone 14 months. This house isn't a museum. You can't keep living here alone pretending she's coming back." I asked her since when she'd started making decisions about my house, my deed, my life without so much as a phone call, and she said, in a voice gone suddenly cold, that somebody needed to start making decisions because I clearly wasn't capable of it anymore. Sitting alone in an empty house, talking to a dead woman's rose bushes. Trevor added, almost bored, leaning back against my own headboard like he owned it, that he'd been helping her get a handle on the finances, which was the first time I heard the word finances used as a threat rather than a fact. When I asked him directly what business he had touching anything of mine, he just smiled and said people in my condition needed someone looking out for them, whether they wanted it or not. I later learned Danielle was carrying $46,000 in credit card debt, most of it run up in the 18 months since her mother's diagnosis, groceries and gas, and a hospital copay she'd never told me about. And Trevor had convinced her that the fastest way out of it ran directly through my accounts and my deed. I called Jerry Voss that same night, still sitting in my own kitchen in my coat because I couldn't bring myself to walk past that bedroom again, my untouched duffel bag of hospital pajamas still by the front door. Jerry had retired from the Dayton Police Department 6 years earlier after 28 years on the force, the last 11 of them in financial crimes. And he'd been the one steady presence in my life since Eleanor's funeral, driving me to appointments in that rattling Buick, sitting with me on the porch some nights with 2 beers neither of us finished when the quiet in the house got too loud to sit in alone. He came over within the hour, still in his work boots from helping his son-in-law with a fence, and he didn't tell me to calm down. He asked me one question. Had Eleanor ever mentioned a man named Trevor Hale before she died? I said no, not once. He asked if I was sure, and something in the way he asked it, careful, deliberate, like a man circling a memory of his own, made me sit with that question for 3 full days. On the 4th day, going through Eleanor's jewelry box looking for her wedding ring, which Danielle had somehow also failed to mention had gone missing from the house sometime in the last 3 weeks, I found a false bottom I never knew existed after 36 years of marriage, a thin panel of cedar that lifted out with a fingernail. Underneath it was a small brass key stamped with the number 214 and a folded note in Eleanor's careful, looping handwriting that said only, Fifth Third, Box 214. If you're reading this, I was right. My hands were shaking so badly I had to ask Jerry to hold the note steady so I could read it twice more. I drove there the next morning with Jerry beside me. The bank not even opened 5 minutes before we were standing at the counter. Inside that safe deposit box was a manila folder nearly 3 inches thick, printed emails, bank statements, and 11 pages of handwritten notes in Eleanor's careful cursive, along with a private investigator's report dated 9 months before she died, commissioned quietly and paid for in cash withdrawals of $200 at a time, so I'd never see a lump sum on our joint statement. She had hired Jerry himself off the books, back when he was still active on the force, to look into a man Danielle had briefly mentioned dating the year before, a man who called himself Trevor Hale, but whose real name, according to the report, was Marcus Reyes, a 53-year-old with 2 prior documented aliases and a pattern of romancing recently widowed men and women in their late 60s and 70s across 3 counties in southwest Ohio. Eleanor's notes named 2 people specifically. Contact information included people she'd tracked down herself through obituary notices and county property records before she got too sick to keep going. I called the first number with my hands shaking so badly I had to set the phone on the kitchen table and put on speaker. Margaret Sinclair, 68 years old, out of Columbus, told me over the phone in a flat, tired voice that a man calling himself Trevor Hale had entered her life 14 months after her husband died, had gotten close to her son's then-girlfriend first, used that connection to get invited to a family barbecue, and then to Margaret's home directly, and within 7 months had convinced her to sign a power of attorney she barely remembered reading, sitting at her own dining room table while he refilled her wine glass and told her not to worry about the fine print. He'd used it to drain $220,000 from her retirement accounts through a shell company called Heritage Bridge Financial, wiring it out in amounts small enough to avoid the bank's fraud alerts before vanishing on a Tuesday morning without so much as a note, taking her late husband's coin collection with him on the way out. The second call was to Harold Ziegler, 74, up in Toledo, who told me the same story with different numbers. $175,000 gone over the course of 9 months. A forged power of attorney his own son didn't discover until a bank teller called to flag an unusual transfer. And an isolation from his own children that had happened so gradually he hadn't noticed it until it was already done. Until his daughter had to drive 4 hours just to sit in his kitchen and go through the bank statements with him line by line. Both of them, Margaret in Columbus and Harold in Toledo, used the same phrase, almost word for word. When I asked how it started, he made me feel like someone was finally paying attention to me again. Harold added something that stuck with me longer than anything else that week, that the worst part wasn't the money. It was realizing that for 9 months, he'd mistaken being managed for being loved. Are you still watching? If this story has your blood boiling the way it had mine, drop a comment letting me know. And hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Because what's coming next is the part that made all of it worth it. And again, a quick reminder that names and certain details in this story have been changed and dramatized for entertainment, though the underlying pattern is very real, and it happens more than most people realize. Jerry brought in a former colleague of his, Detective Renata Cho of the Dayton Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who listened to our whole story without interrupting once, and then spread Eleanor's folder across her desk like it was the missing half of a case she already recognized. Together, the 3 of us built out what Eleanor had already started. Ohio is a single-party consent state, which meant I could legally record my own conversations with Trevor and Danielle without telling them. And Jerry helped me wire a small digital recorder into the inside pocket of my cardigan for 3 separate conversations over the following 11 days, each one drawing Trevor a little further into describing, in his own words, how he planned to use the forged power of attorney to list my house for sale, and where he intended to move the proceeds once the closing went through. Detective Cho, working alongside Margaret Sinclair's original case file, which had gone cold 2 years earlier for lack of evidence, was able to formally connect Trevor Hale to Marcus Reyes through a set of fingerprints still on file from an old traffic stop in Franklin County, along with a driver's license photo Harold Ziegler's son identified within seconds of seeing it. The plan we built centered on a real estate closing Trevor and Danielle had already scheduled, without my knowledge, for March 27th at a title company on Far Hills Avenue, to sell my house for $310,000 using a power of attorney document with a forged version of my signature notarized by a notary who, it later turned out, Trevor had used in at least one of his prior schemes as well. On the morning of March 27th, I sat in the waiting room of that title company on Far Hills Avenue with Jerry beside me, a cup of bad vending machine coffee going cold in my hands, and Detective Cho's unmarked car parked across the street where I could just see it through the blinds. I listened through the thin conference room wall as the title agent, briefed by Detective Cho the day before, read through the closing documents to Danielle and Trevor in a calm, professional voice, watched the shadows of their signatures move across the frosted glass as they signed everything with the easy confidence of two people who believed they had already won. My chest was tight in a way that had nothing to do with the surgery. When the agent, right on cue, said she needed the seller to step in and confirm his identity before the funds could be released, I stood up, steadied myself on my cane, and walked through that door myself. I will never forget the look on Trevor's face in that exact moment. The color draining out of it in real time, the way a man's face drains when he realizes the ground under him was never as solid as he thought. Danielle's mouth actually fell open before she managed to say my name like a question, Dad, like she was hoping I might still be 3 days away in that rehabilitation facility instead of standing 8 feet in front of her. Detective Cho and 2 uniformed officers came in behind me before either of them could stand up from the table. Trevor Hale, whose real name the officers read aloud as Marcus Reyes, was placed under arrest on the spot, hands behind his back against the same conference table where he'd just tried to sign away my house. And the charges laid out over the following days included forgery, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, and felony exploitation of an elderly adult, a specific charge that exists in Ohio precisely because cases like Margaret's and Harold's and mine happen far more often than anyone wants to admit. Danielle was arrested 3 days later at her own apartment on a lesser charge of conspiracy. Once financial records showed she had known the power of attorney was forged and had signed the closing paperwork anyway. The trial began 4 months later in July, and it lasted 6 days in a Montgomery County courtroom that smelled faintly of floor wax and old radiator heat. I sat through testimony from Margaret Sinclair, who flew in from Columbus on her own dime and described, in a steady voice that cracked only once, the $220,000 she never got back, and her late husband's coin collection she still hadn't stopped looking for in antique shops. I sat through testimony from Harold Ziegler, who brought a folder of his own bank statements from Toledo and set it on the witness stand like evidence he'd been carrying around at his chest for 2 years, waiting for someone to finally ask him to open it, his voice steady until he mentioned that his son had once accused him, before any of this came out, of being paranoid and ungrateful. The defense tried twice to paint Danielle as a victim herself, manipulated by a man twice her experience in deception, and I'll admit that argument cost me more sleep than anything the prosecution said. When it came time for my own victim impact statement, I stood up in that courtroom with my cane in one hand and told the judge that the hardest part wasn't the $310,000 we'd almost lost, or the $87,000 already siphoned out of a secondary account through smaller wire transfers, averaging $12,400 a month since January. The hardest part was that a man who never knew my wife had nearly erased the last of her from our house before I even had the chance to grieve her properly, and that my own daughter had stood beside him while he did it. The jury foreperson read the verdict on a Thursday afternoon in late July. Marcus Reyes, guilty on all 4 counts, forgery, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, and felony exploitation of an elderly adult. Sentenced to 11 years in state prison with restitution, ordered though we all understood how rarely that money ever fully comes back. Danielle, given the lesser charge and her cooperation once the evidence became overwhelming, received 3 years of probation for 100 hours of community service and a court order of restitution of her own. It has been 8 months since that verdict, and my house on Larchmont Avenue looks different now, not because I tore anything out in anger, but because I finally let myself put some of it back together, piece by piece, the way Eleanor would have wanted it done. I replanted her rose garden along the east fence, the one I'd let go dry and brittle in the year after she died. And this past spring, it came back fuller than either of us ever managed to grow it together in 36 years of trying. Jerry Voss and his wife Carol have become something like family to me in a way I didn't expect at 71. Sunday dinners at their table, his grandchildren calling me Uncle Ray, without anyone ever officially deciding that's what I'd be. A folding chair that's become permanently mine at their kitchen table. Using a portion of the restitution funds, I set up a small scholarship at Sinclair Community College in Eleanor's name for students studying elder law and financial protection services. Because if there's one thing her hidden folder taught me, it's that she spent her last months on Earth quietly protecting a future she wouldn't live to see. My relationship with Danielle remains fractured, still healing in small, uneven pieces. A phone call here, an awkward coffee there, some weeks better than others. And I've made peace with the fact that some trust, once spent, takes longer to rebuild than any bank account ever could. If there's one thing I want you to take from all of this, it's that love doesn't disqualify someone from doing you harm. And the people who claim to be protecting you are sometimes the ones you most need to watch closely. If this story meant something to you, tell me where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. And if you've got a story of your own about a family who let you down or a stranger who saved you, I'd genuinely like to hear it in the comments below.